It's strange how a place you know so well, a place you grew up in, can suddenly feel like the most unsafe spot in the world. For me, that night came in a house I'd known all my life. It wasn't big or fancy, just a small family home where my brother and I shared a room for years. 2 twin beds across from each other, 2 closets that never had enough space, and just enough room for us to grow up without killing each other. When he left for college, I finally claimed the room for myself. I pushed his bed out, slid in a desk, and felt like I'd carved out my own little world. For 2 years it worked perfectly, but life has a way of twisting things back. When he came home after graduation, he naturally took back the room. I couldn't complain. I had done the same thing to him. So I ended up in the guest room upstairs, smaller, quieter, and right above the garage. It wasn't a bad spot most of the time. 2 windows, one looking over the driveway, the other down the side of the house. At night, the sound of the garage door opening made the whole floor vibrate. I used to joke that I never needed a clock. If someone came home, I'd know just from the shaking. That night, though, the vibration wasn't something to laugh about. I remember it clearly. A Friday evening, hot and still, the kind of night when the house feels heavier because everyone's away. My parents were at the shore house for the weekend, my brother was out of town for work, and I had the place to myself. I didn't feel like going out. I ordered some food, stretched out with a book, and told myself I'd catch up on sleep. It was quiet, unusually quiet, and I was starting to drift when the familiar sound rolled through the floor. The garage door was rising. First, my mind didn't process it. The sound was normal enough, almost comforting, but it only took a few seconds before the truth hit. Nobody should have been home. My parents had told me they'd be gone until Sunday night. My brother wasn't due back until the next afternoon. That left me, and only me. I froze with the book still open in my hands, staring at nothing, as the vibration under my feet faded. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I jumped up and ran to the window that overlooked the driveway. The garage door was open. I squinted into the dark, trying to see if a car had pulled in. The shadows swallowed everything. Maybe my parents had come back early, I told myself. Maybe my brother had changed plans. Maybe the door had just malfunctioned. I tried to feed myself excuses, but my chest already knew better. I grabbed through the closet until my hand found an old baseball bat, one my parents had tossed there years before. It felt too light in my grip, like a toy, but it was all I had. The house was silent again, so quiet I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I crept to the top of the stairs, one step at a time, trying not to breathe too loudly. The operator's voice from every 911 training video I'd ever seen replayed in my head. Stay hidden, don't confront, wait for help. But when I turned the corner and heard them, faint voices drifting from the far side of the house, that warning evaporated. 2 men, maybe more, talking low, moving through my parents' bedroom. The sound of drawers opening, items being shifted, their hands in the things my family had collected for decades. A heat flushed through me, something I couldn't control. My fingers clenched the bat tighter. Instead of retreating, I dialed 911, whispered my address, and shoved the phone back into my pocket without ending the call. My body wanted me to hide, but my mind couldn't stand it. These men were in my house. Step by step, I crossed the hallway, my back pressed to the wall, my breath slow and shallow. The closer I came, the louder the sounds grew. The rustle of clothes being tossed aside, the dull thump of a drawer slammed shut, the careless mutter of voices that had no business being there. Fear burned in my stomach, but something stronger pushed me forward. I stopped outside my parents' bedroom, tightened my grip on the bat, and with one deep breath, I screamed as loud as I could and charged inside. The look on their faces when I burst in was something I'll never forget. 2 men, both in the middle of ransacking my mother's closet, turned toward me, stunned. They hadn't expected anyone home. They certainly hadn't expected someone willing to fight. I swung at the closest one, connecting with his leg. The crack of wood against bone echoed louder than my shout. He stumbled, cursed, and fell hard. The second man didn't hesitate. He dropped his shoulder and slammed into me before I could bring the bat up again. The force sent us crashing to the floor, the bat slipping from my grip. He was stronger, heavier, and his hands locked around my throat so quickly I couldn't even gasp. The room blurred as I clawed at him, fighting to pry his grip loose. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the other man crawling, something glinting in his hand. A knife. My mind screamed at me. I had made a mistake. This was it. In that moment, lying on my parents' bedroom floor, I truly believed I was about to die. And all I could think about was how my mother would walk into this house and find me there. My vision was dimming, my arms weakening when a sound cut through everything. Sirens. Faint at first but rising. The wail of salvation drawing closer. The man choking me snarled and yanked the bat up instead, swinging it down hard against my head. White light exploded across my vision, then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, the world was spinning. A voice cut through the haze, gentle, steady. A police officer leaning over me, asking if I was all right. My head pounded like it was splitting in two, but I was alive. The bedroom door was wide open, the night air pouring in, and the intruders were gone. The sirens had scared them off before finishing the job. Even through the pain, I forced myself to sit up. The officer warned me not to, said I might be concussed, but I didn't care. I scanned the room, every overturned drawer and scattered piece of clothing, every mark of their intrusion, trying to understand how close I had come. My phone, still in my pocket, was buzzing from the live 911 call I'd never ended. Paramedics checked me over, told me to go to the hospital, but I refused. I couldn't bring myself to leave the house in their hands. I gave the police every detail I could remember, every word, every glimpse, every movement. They searched, canvassed the neighborhood, but by then, the men had disappeared into the night. Later, as I sat in that ruined room with the pounding in my head, and the weight of silence pressing down, something colder settled in. Every door had been locked that night. The garage opener was a button in my car, hidden, wired by my dad years ago. The only way to trigger it was to know exactly where it was. Whoever had come into our home hadn't chosen it at random. They knew us. They knew me. That thought lingered long after the house fell quiet again. I tried to sleep that night, but the house felt poisoned. Every creak in the floor, every faint hum of the refrigerator, every shadow spilling across the walls seemed alive. My parents' room still smelled faintly of sweat from the men who had been inside. My head throbbed from the hit, but the pain wasn't what kept me awake. It was the thought that they had known too much about us. The next morning, I called my parents at the Shore house. I expected concern, maybe panic, but what I got first was anger. They shouted at me for charging into the room, for swinging that bat, for not hiding until the police arrived. And they were right. I had been reckless, maybe stupid. If those men had decided not to run, I wouldn't be alive to make the call. My brother, when I finally got through to him, wasn't much kinder. He reminded me that being brave didn't mean being smart, and that our family had almost lost me because of it. Their voices cut deep, but the guilt was already there before they said a word. Still, guilt couldn't explain what gnawed at me the most. The garage opener. The timing. The fact that they knew the house would be empty except for me. That wasn't random. That wasn't luck. Whoever had broken in wasn't some stranger wandering through the neighborhood. They were connected, somehow. The police came back later that weekend. They set up cameras, motion lights, alarms that shrieked if a window opened. My dad insisted on the full system. Every corner monitored, every lock reinforced. It made him feel in control, but to me it just felt like proof that control was already gone. No matter how many lights flashed or sirens wailed, I couldn't shake the memory of the man's hand around my throat, or the other crawling forward with that knife. It was burned in like a scar you can't touch but know is there. Weeks passed, and the house never felt the same. I stopped using the guest room and started sleeping on the couch downstairs, closer to the front door. I locked my car every night, double-checked the garage, and left the lights on until morning. Even then, I woke at the slightest sound. More than once, I bolted upright, convinced the garage door was moving again, only to find silence. My parents thought I was paranoid, but they didn't understand. They hadn't been there. It was months later when the second story began. By then, I had moved out of my parents' house entirely, thinking distance would help. I found a duplex closer to my mom's place, which made sense since she needed me more and more. She'd been struggling with her balance, had a couple of falls, and though she downplayed them, I could see the worry in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. I begged her to get a medical alert system, one of those simple things she could press if she needed help, but she always brushed me off. "I'm fine, stop fussing," she'd say, and I'd let it go, even though it gnawed at me. The duplex was quiet, modest, just enough space for me to feel independent without being far away. I'd settled into a routine work, checking on my mom, evenings to myself. It felt manageable, almost peaceful until the phone rang one night. A local number I didn't know. I almost didn't answer, but something told me it might be important. The woman on the line said she was a nurse from the local ER. Her voice was calm, practiced, the kind of tone that makes you trust someone immediately. She told me my mom had been brought in after a fall, that she'd hit her head but was conscious and asking for me. She mentioned my mother's full name, her address, even her recent hip surgery. My stomach dropped, fear crashing over me. I didn't think for a second that it might not be true. How could I? She knew everything. I grabbed my keys, ran out without even locking the door, and sped toward the hospital. My mind raced with images of my mom lying in a bed, pale and fragile, calling for me. I prayed under my breath the entire drive, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles hurt. When I pulled into the hospital parking lot, I didn't even look for a spot. I just stopped and ran. At the reception desk, I gave my mom's name. The nurse frowned, typed, checked again. She looked up and told me there was no record of anyone by that name. My throat went dry. I explained about the call, about the nurse on the line, about the fall. She shook her head, said there had been no admission like that, no fall, nothing. Maybe I had the wrong hospital, she suggested kindly, but I knew this was the one closest to my mom's house. Still clinging to hope, I stepped outside and dialed her landline. She answered on the second ring, groggy but fine. She'd been asleep. No fall. No hospital. No nurse. The realization slammed into me like a car. It had been a trick. Whoever had called knew enough about me, about her, to lure me out of my house. My chest tightened with fury, shame, fear all tangled together. I raced home praying I was wrong. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew. The silence was wrong, heavier than before. My TV was gone. My laptop. My jewelry box. But worse, my family photos, the ones in frames by the staircase, stripped bare. Only the frames left. Prescription bottles from the bathroom, emptied and missing. Not valuables. Personal. Intimate. Like someone wanted to erase me or own me. I stood there in the doorway, shaking my mind, trying to find logic where there was none. Who steals photos? Who takes medicine bottles with names and dates still printed on them? The police came, listened and nodded, but their faces said what I already knew. They couldn't do much. They told me to be careful, to call back if I had more information. Then they left me in that hollowed-out house, the air still heavy with someone else's presence. That night I sat on the couch staring at the empty photo frames, and for the first time in my life, I felt hunted. Not just robbed, but chosen. Someone out there knew us, knew me, well enough to pull me from my house with a single phone call, and they weren't done. I could feel it even in the silence. The police left, but the walls of that duplex didn't feel like mine anymore. I sat there with the empty frames and scattered drawers, trying to imagine the hands that had taken those photos, the eyes that had stared at them before slipping them into some bag. Jewelry I could replace. A television meant nothing. But my family pictures, the idea that someone else was holding them, flipping through them, maybe memorizing the faces, it twisted my stomach in ways I can't explain. I didn't sleep that night. Every car that passed outside made me jump. Every creak in the floor sounded like someone's weight shifting just out of sight. I started keeping the lights on even in the hallways. I thought about calling my mom and telling her everything, but I knew she would panic. She already hated being alone, and if she thought someone had targeted us, she'd never close her eyes again. So I lied. I told her I'd had a rough day, that I was tired, nothing more. But deep down, I knew the break-in wasn't about money. Thieves don't steal prescription bottles with my name on them. They don't take photographs out of frames. Whoever had come into my home wanted something deeper. They wanted me unsettled. They wanted me vulnerable. Weeks passed and nothing else happened. No strange calls. No unexplained shadows at the window. But the quiet only made it worse. I kept waiting for the next move, checking locks 3, 4 times before bed, jumping whenever the phone rang. My mom brushed it off when I asked if she'd shared personal details with anyone. She had plenty of friends and I knew she loved to talk, but this wasn't gossip. This was calculated. It was about 2 months later when I found myself in another new place. A rented house in a quiet neighborhood. I'd moved again, desperate for a fresh start. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine. A small single-story house with peeling paint on the porch and a yard that needed cutting. But the rent was good, and after everything, I just wanted a roof that didn't carry the memory of someone else's footsteps inside it. For almost a year nothing happened. I settled into a rhythm: work, checking on my mom, nights alone with dinner and the TV. I told myself I was safe. I told myself the nightmare was behind me. But then came that Thursday night. It was late, close to midnight, and I was getting ready for bed when the pounding started. Not a knock. Not someone politely asking to be let in. Pounding. Hard, angry, like fists trying to break the door down. My body went cold. I froze at first, just listening to the echo of it. Then cautiously I walked to the window. The porch light was too dim to see clearly, but I could make out the shape of a man. He wasn't just waiting, he was pacing, fists slamming the door, breathing hard like he'd run miles. His hair stuck out like he hadn't showered in days, his clothes crumpled and dirty. Something about him radiated anger. I kept the screen door shut, stepped halfway out, and demanded to know what he wanted. His eyes darted wildly, his words spilling out fast and sharp. He shouted that this was his house, that I was trespassing, and that if I didn't leave he'd call the police. First I thought he was high, or maybe having some sort of breakdown. I told him calmly that he had the wrong place, but that only made him worse. He began rattling off details about the house, details no stranger could know. He knew about the bedroom door that banged into the toilet when you swung it too far. He knew the back door stuck unless you lifted it while turning the knob. He knew things you could only know by living there. I stood frozen. I hadn't told anyone those little quirks. Even my landlord had brushed off the door issue when I mentioned it. How did this man know? Before I could ask, he pulled out a folder and slid papers against the screen. A lease agreement with his name on it, dated months before I'd moved in. Then mail, addressed to him at this very house. And then came the worst part. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos. Photos of him inside the house. On my couch. Cooking in my kitchen. Even lying on the bed that I slept in every night. The pictures looked recent, casual, real. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. My brain scrambled for some explanation, some reason those images existed, but nothing made sense. He showed me one more picture, a group photo at my kitchen table. People I didn't know smiling at fireworks on the counter. He swore it was from the 4th of July, only a few months back. But I knew where I had been that night. Right there at that same table alone. For a split second I doubted myself. Was I losing my mind? Had I forgotten something, some moment where this man and I had crossed paths? But no. The pictures didn't fit. None of it did. I told him I was calling the police, not as a threat but as a way to make sense of what was happening. His face changed instantly. The rage slipped away. He nodded, stepped back, and said he'd wait outside. Then he walked into the dark and vanished. When the police arrived, I poured it all out. The pounding, the threats, the lease, the mail, the photos. They listened, but their eyes glazed over, as if it was just another late-night disturbance. They told me to talk to my landlord, to confirm who had lived here before me. I offered to show them the documentation he'd waved at me, but they didn't want it. They said he was probably unstable, maybe suffering a breakdown, and that I should just stay cautious. Then they left. I didn't sleep that night either. The silence after they left was worse than the pounding had been. I paced the rooms, staring at the doors, touching the locks again and again. My hands shook when I tried to eat the next morning, and my stomach clenched whenever I looked at my bed. His body had been there, if the photos were real. His hands on my kitchen counters, his friends in my dining room. It felt like the house wasn't mine anymore. It never had been. The landlord was just as shocked as I was when I told him. He swore he'd never rented to anyone like that. He gave me the names of the last tenants, and when I reached out to them, they were confused too. They'd lived alone for 3 years. They had never seen anyone matching the man's description. They had no idea where the photos could have come from. But I couldn't forget his eyes. Wild, frantic, but filled with something worse than madness, certainty. Certainty that the house was his, that I was the intruder. And I knew deep down this wasn't over. I told myself over and over that maybe it was finished, that the strange man who claimed my house had vanished for good. But I couldn't shake the unease. Even after the police brushed it off, even after the landlord swore no one else had ever lived there, the image of his eyes stayed in my head. They weren't just the eyes of someone unstable. They were the eyes of someone convinced. And conviction is scarier than madness. For the next 2 weeks, I lived like a shadow in my own home. I checked every lock 3 times before lying down, left lights on in the kitchen and hallway, and walked the perimeter of the yard before going inside. I even bought a cheap camera for the front porch, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. At night, I'd lie awake and wonder about the pictures he'd shown me. How they could look so natural, so ordinary, as if life had really happened inside those walls without me ever knowing. Then one night, I came home from a night out with friends and everything collapsed again. The moment I opened the door, I froze. The air felt wrong, heavy. I stepped inside and my stomach dropped. My house had been torn apart. Not like a normal break-in where things are taken quickly, no. Every drawer pulled out, every cushion slashed, closets emptied, clothes strewn across the floor. It was like someone had been hunting for something, digging through every inch. What chilled me most was what they didn't take. My laptop sat on the table untouched. My TV still mounted on the wall. Even my wallet, tossed carelessly on the counter, remained. Whoever had been there hadn't wanted money or electronics. They wanted something else. Something I didn't understand. The police came, more serious this time. They combed through the rooms, dusted surfaces, asked the same questions I had no answers for. The strangest part? No forced entry. Every window locked, every door intact. That meant they had a key. When I told the officers about the man at my door weeks earlier, about the lease and the photos, they finally stopped dismissing me. They nodded grimly, admitted it might be connected. My landlord replaced the locks immediately, free of charge, and added extra bolts. But locks didn't stop the fear. Because if someone already had a key once, what would stop them from finding another? I kept circling back to the photos. That was the piece I couldn't swallow. Papers could be faked. Mail could be stolen. But pictures of him on my couch, of his friends laughing at my table, of fireworks on the counter from a holiday I'd spent alone. They looked too real, too casual. And when I thought about them long enough, a deeper fear crept in, that maybe reality itself wasn't what I thought it was. That maybe someone else's life had bled into mine, and I was the one intruding. My friends tried to calm me, offered theories, maybe old photos with altered dates, maybe staged forgeries, maybe a scam. But none of them explained how he knew the quirks of the house so well, or how he seemed so sure of his claim. And none of them explained the break-in, the way my belongings had been torn apart but left behind, as if the intruder had been searching for something I didn't even know existed. The days after felt endless. I jumped at footsteps on the sidewalk, hesitated before turning my own key in the lock, scanned the rooms before settling in. Sleep came in fragments, always broken by the imagined sound of fists on the door. More than once I swore I heard someone outside in the yard, but when I looked, nothing was there. Still, the feeling lingered that I was being watched. I called my landlord again, desperate for some explanation. He repeated what he'd already said. He'd owned the house for years, rented it carefully, never had a tenant like the one I described. He even checked his records while I sat there on the phone, his voice heavy with confusion. He didn't know who the man was. He didn't know how he had documentation. And he certainly didn't know how he'd gotten a copy of the key. That left me with nothing but my own spiraling thoughts. At night, I replayed the man's face in my mind. The way his anger had melted into calm when I mentioned the police. The way he'd promised to wait outside, then disappeared into the dark. The way his hands had held the photos steady, like proof he'd been saving for years. I wanted to move, but moving again felt pointless. What if he followed? What if he wasn't tied to the house at all, but to me? I'd already moved once after the last intrusion, and here I was again, ripped open and exposed. Running didn't feel like a solution anymore. So I stayed, and I waited. The days slid by in a blur of half-slept nights and constant tension. I'd tell myself in the daylight that maybe it was over, maybe the locks and cameras were enough, maybe he'd gone. But when darkness fell, the doubts returned, heavier than ever. Some nights, lying in bed, I'd picture the worst. I'd imagine him standing just outside the window, watching. I'd imagine him holding those photos, flipping through them slowly, whispering names to himself. I'd imagine him slipping the new key into the lock, the sound of it turning, the quiet creak of the door swinging open while I slept. And the hardest part was never knowing if it was all in my head or if it was already happening. I told myself maybe I was imagining the worst, maybe the man would never come back. But the thought of him holding those photos, his hand steady as he showed them to me, kept replaying in my head. I could still hear the pounding on my door, the sound of his voice yelling that I was the trespasser. Even when the house was quiet, even when the new locks clicked into place, I felt like I was just a guest. The home wasn't mine anymore. The nights became unbearable. I'd lie awake listening, waiting, convinced at any moment I'd hear the creak of the floor or the slow turning of a key. My friends told me I was paranoid, that I needed sleep, but they hadn't seen what I had. They hadn't stood face to face with someone who carried proof that your life might not be your own. It was about 3 weeks later when everything cracked open again. I had spent the evening out trying to pretend I was normal, trying to laugh at jokes that didn't feel funny. When I pulled into the driveway close to midnight, the first thing I noticed was that the porch light wasn't on. I always left it on, a small comfort against the dark. My stomach twisted as I stepped out of the car. The front door looked the same, no signs of damage, no broken locks. But when I opened it, the smell hit me first. Not blood, not smoke, but the smell of strangers, sweat, dirt, something stale and sour. I flicked on the lights, and the living room looked like a storm had blown through. Furniture overturned, drawers ripped out and emptied, papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. I stumbled forward, calling out, but the silence swallowed my voice. The kitchen was worse. Every cabinet door hung open, cans and boxes tossed aside. Plates shattered on the floor, the fridge left wide. It was the same upstairs. My clothes pulled from the closet, shoes thrown across the room, mattress dragged half off the bed. And yet, just like before, the things that mattered to most burglars were still there. The laptop still on my desk, the TV untouched, the wallet in plain sight. Whoever had been there hadn't wanted money or gadgets. They wanted something else. Something buried, maybe something even I didn't know about. The police came again, but their questions felt thinner this time. They admitted it matched the story I had given before, admitted the lack of forced entry suggested someone with a key, but beyond that, they had nothing. They told me to document everything, to stay with friends for a few nights if I needed to, but what they didn't understand was that leaving didn't solve anything. Because the problem wasn't the house. The problem was him. For days after, I couldn't stop replaying his words. This is my house. You're the trespasser. The longer I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. What if he believed it so completely that reality bent to his version? What if those photos weren't forged, weren't stolen, but real in some way I couldn't explain? The idea made my skin crawl, but I couldn't push it away. I started digging, reaching out to the landlord again, asking about old tenants, asking if maybe someone had lived there under the radar. He swore again he knew nothing. The previous tenants repeated their confusion. They had lived there alone, never rented to anyone else. It made no sense. The nights that followed were worse than any I'd lived before. Every sound felt loaded. I started leaving the television on at night just to mask the silence. I carried a baseball bat with me from room to room, the same one I'd used years earlier in my parents' house, as if the weight of it could protect me again. But in the dark, even holding it felt like nothing. One night, as I was lying awake, I thought I heard something outside the bedroom window. A soft scraping like someone's shoe dragging across the gravel. My body went rigid listening. The scraping came again, then silence. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Minutes crawled by, stretching into an hour, and finally I told myself it had been a branch, an animal, anything but what I feared. But the next morning when I went outside, I saw the marks in the dirt beneath the window. Footprints. That was when I knew the cameras weren't enough. The locks weren't enough. Nothing I did could stop him from circling closer. And maybe I thought maybe he wasn't just circling the house. Maybe he was circling me. I started to wonder if he was waiting for me to break, if all of this, the pounding, the photos, the ransacking, wasn't about taking anything at all. Maybe it was about stripping me down piece by piece until I didn't know who I was anymore. Until I doubted myself enough to hand him the keys and walk away. The thought terrified me because it almost worked. There were nights I stood in the doorway, keys in hand, ready to leave. Nights when I thought about driving until the gas ran out and never coming back. But something kept me rooted, maybe stubbornness, maybe fear, maybe just the simple fact that if I left, I'd never stop running. The last time the police came, one of them, a younger officer, tired but kind, pulled me aside. He lowered his voice and said, "Sometimes people fixate. They convince themselves of things that aren't true. You can't reason with it. You just have to protect yourself and hope it ends. Hope. That was all he could offer me. Hope that someone who had already broken in twice, who had already stood on my porch with proof in his hands, would just get tired and leave me alone. But as I lay in bed that night, the bat propped beside me, the lights still burning, I realized hope wasn't enough. The truth was, I didn't know if I was sharing my house with a ghost from the past, a stranger from the future, or just a man who had decided my life was his. All I knew was that he wasn't finished. I thought the fear would wear off, that eventually the man would fade into memory the way most nightmares do. But nights stretched on, each one longer than the last, and the weight of waiting grew heavier. I lived in that house like a prisoner, always listening, always tense, always ready for the next intrusion that I knew was coming. The strangest part was how quiet the days were. Nothing unusual ever happened under the sun. The mail came. Neighbors waved as they watered their lawns. Kids rode by on bikes, laughing, unaware of the shadow that seemed to hang over my roof. In daylight, I could almost convince myself I'd imagined everything, that the pounding on the door, the photos, the ransacking were fragments of some bad dream. But the nights stripped that comfort away. The nights reminded me that silence doesn't always mean safety. It was on a Sunday evening, weeks after the last break-in, when the silence finally broke again. I was sitting on the couch, the bat resting beside me like an old friend, when I heard it, the soft click of a lock turning. Not loud, not violent, just deliberate. My heart slammed in my chest as I froze, listening. The sound came again. The front door. I didn't move at first. Part of me wanted to believe it was the wind, or maybe the lock settling. But then slowly the door eased open. I could see the sliver of night through the crack, see the way it widened inch by inch, and then a figure slipped inside. He didn't rush. He didn't stumble. He moved like he belonged there, like this was his home. My breath caught in my throat as I gripped the bat tighter, my hands slick with sweat. He stood in the living room, his eyes sweeping over the chaos of lights and the television buzzing quietly. Then he looked at me. There was no shock on his face, no hesitation, just certainty. "You're still here," he said quietly, almost like he pitied me. I stood, raising the bat, but he didn't flinch. He stepped closer, pulling something from his pocket. Papers again. He dropped them onto the coffee table like evidence in a trial. Lease agreements, letters, photographs. The same proof I'd seen before, but more this time. Dozens of photos. Him on the porch. Him in the kitchen. Him in my bed. "I told you," he said. His voice wasn't loud now. It was calm, steady. "This is my house." I don't know what came over me then. Rage, fear, desperation, all tangled together. I shouted at him to leave, to get out, to never come back. I swung the bat, but he stepped back, his expression unchanged. For a moment it felt like I was the one trespassing, the one who had to justify why I was standing there. Then the sirens came. My neighbors must have called the police when they saw someone slipping inside. The man glanced toward the sound, then back at me. And for the first time his calm cracked. His eyes hardened. "This isn't over," he said, before turning and slipping out the door into the night. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They searched, but they found nothing. They listened to my story again, took the papers he'd left, promised to look into it. But when I saw their faces, I knew what they were thinking. That I was trapped in some endless loop with a man they couldn't catch and didn't understand. The landlord replaced the locks again, added stronger bolts, even reinforced the windows. I installed cameras in every room, alarms that screamed at the slightest movement. But deep down I knew none of it mattered. Because the real invasion wasn't the breaking of a lock or the opening of a door. It was the way he'd gotten inside my head, the way he'd made me question what was real, what was mine. Nights stretched into months. Sometimes I thought I saw him on the street, a figure in the distance watching. Sometimes I swore I heard footsteps outside the window. Sometimes I wake and feel certain that someone had been in the room, standing over me while I slept. I never had proof, just the feeling. Always the feeling. The police never found him. The papers he'd left turned out to be a mix of real and fake, some legitimate-looking documents, others altered, none that clearly proved anything. The photos remained the most haunting. Experts couldn't say if they were forged. Some looked undeniably authentic. Some seemed too recent to dismiss. But no one could explain them. In the end I moved again. I packed what little I had left the frames empty, and drove until the house was a shrinking dot in my mirror. I thought leaving would lift the weight, but the truth followed me, because it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the knowledge that someone could step so completely into your life, claim it as their own, and leave you doubting whether it was ever yours to begin with. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear that pounding on the door. I still see him standing there, eyes wild with certainty. I still hear his voice steady and calm, telling me what I already fear, that it was never really my home.